few years now. I originally gave this talk as a, originally gave this talk as a PhD student. At the time, I was part of a seminar class, and we were handed a list of topics, and I wanted to know more about long-term athlete development. I wanted to learn more about what the best practices are when it comes to working with kids, what the best practices are when it comes to trying to develop kids long-term, both to maximize the chances that they do well in sport, but also to make sure to help out those kids who are not going to continue in sport. Because the reality is that most kids do not make it to the Olympics. And by most, I mean 99.9%. Most kids do not make it to the MLB. Most kids do not make it to the NBA or the WNBA or to world championships or national championships or any of that. And so, in my opinion, in this country, we can do a lot, and probably worldwide too, we can do a lot better job with how we develop kids for sport to maximize the chances that they go on and do something amazing. But also, when they wash out and they stop being a part of organized sport, that we serve them a little bit better. Because a lot of the time, I think we make the mistake of thinking short term. We think, hey, what do I need to do right now to help my 8-year-old, win the division championships? Yeah, that's what the perspective that a lot of parents take. That's the perspective that a lot of people take, and I think that's a major mistake. And I think that the research supports why that's a big mistake, and we'll go into that, and we'll go into some of why I think why I and many other people think that's the case. So what we'll cover today is we're going to talk about skill development in youth. We're going to talk about how skills are developed, talk about sort of the pyramid approach to skill development, and talk about how it's often done, and I'll talk about how it should be done. And it's not just my opinion here. There's a very good body of research and a lot of experts that support this kind of idea. We'll also go over why kids should not early specialize in sport. One of the things that unfortunately we do quite a bit is that we make kids do the same sport, and then when they finish that season, then they do that same sport again, and then they finish that season, and they do that same sport again, and they finish that season. And so we have like 8 and 9 and 10-year-olds that only play soccer. We have 9 and 10-year-olds that only play baseball, that only do one thing. And that's problematic for a few reasons that I'll talk about later. I'll introduce a better model for how we might try to develop kids long-term. It's something called long-term athlete development. This is a model that was developed quite a long time ago, but it's only until recently that more research has come out to support how useful it is. It's only until relatively recently, like last 10 or 15 years, that there's been broader adoption of some of these ideas, and they're starting to bear fruit. And then finally, we'll talk about how to apply resistance training in young athletes. So one of the things I want to start with that I think is really critical for where we're gonna go today is to first introduce the idea is that kids can be pretty darn strong. They can be a lot more capable than you realize. By virtue of the fact that they have very low mass and their nervous systems respond even better than do adult nervous systems, they have the capability to be very strong and complete some pretty impressive feats of strength. And if there's a single person in here that can do this as well as these kids, I will pay for the rest of your education. Okay? So we have this idea that kids are, fragile, that they're breakable, that they're not supposed to be strong, that they're not supposed to be able to do anything. But this is absolutely not the case. And this isn't just little boys too. Okay, this is another one. My offer still stands. If there's anybody that can do this as well as she can at like 9 years old, I'll pay the rest of your education. Okay? So it's little boys and girls can be strong as hell. Hey, I have watched 10-year-old girls knock out 10, 12 strict pull-ups. I have watched little like 7 and 8 year old athletes be able to knock out pistol squats with ease. Okay, the kids can be incredibly strong. They can be incredibly strong. And I think this is important to try to remember is that, number one, they can be strong, but also everything that they do as a result of being this strong is easier. Okay, everything that they do is easier as a result of this strength. By working on this fundamental quality, this sets them up to be successful in a lot of different ways. Now, before we dive any farther, I want to make sure that we're all on the same page here, because I know many of us have not learned all that much about childhood development. We want to, or we can, break down the lifespan of a child rather broadly into childhood and adolescence. So childhood, actually let's start with adolescence, because it's kind of part of the definition of childhood. Adolescence is roughly around when puberty starts. So often that's defined as the onset of menses, so the first period. For boys, it's a little bit more difficult to define, because you don't have that sort of big scary thing just happen. Sometimes this adolescence is defined as the moment in time when the growth spurt happens, so when you start growing fast. It's something called peak height velocity is the way that people measure this, is that it's the period of time where your height increases are the fastest. But it's puberty-ish. Okay, it's puberty-ish. Again, it's a little bit hard to define. It's a little bit, depending on the researcher, depending on the research, how they define this exactly tends to differ. But we can call it puberty-ish. So adolescence starts at the time of puberty and then lasts into the teen years. Okay? Whereas childhood lasts from infancy up to adolescence. And the reason we want to differentiate these is because there's some pretty big things that happen around adolescence. Okay, so with adolescence, both boys and girls get absolutely saturated with hormones. Okay, so girls get saturated with lots and lots and lots of estradiol, okay, or estrogen. Okay, they get lots and lots of estrogen. And so that results in pretty immense changes in their bodies. Little boys get saturated with testosterone, which causes immense changes in their bodies. And so the difference between a kid before and after puberty is gigantic because of the fact that they've been exposed to such high levels of the hormones that are responsible for their secondary sexual characteristics. And so as a result of that, we're not really talking about the same animal there. We're not really talking about the same kid in the same place in their life. Prior to adolescence, boys and girls are pretty darn similar. They're built about the same way. They have about the same amount of muscle mass, about the same bone mineral density. They're pretty much the same. But it's once puberty happens that boys get tons of testosterone and women get tons and tons of estrogen that we start seeing a deviation. Okay, we still see a lot of spread. It's not like we have two clear boxes. Okay, it's not like, all right, we got the little teeny tiny box for women over here and a little teeny tiny box for men over here. It's much more of it's a spectrum. Okay, it definitely is a spectrum. Is that we have variation within what we call male and what we call female, but it's still, we kind of have clusters. Okay, is that we cluster around what we typically think of as female and cluster around to what we typically think of as male, which results in big changes between the two. But the main moral of the story here is that in childhood, we're dealing with a different animal than we are during adolescence. Okay, and we want to think about those a little bit differently. So when it comes to skill development, we also want to think about this a little bit differently than most of you have considered, is that I like to think about skills as being a part of a pyramid. Okay, I like to think of skills as being a part of a pyramid, is that on the base of the pyramid, you have simple fundamental motor skills. These are the qualities that make up the base of all other skill. These are things like being able to stabilize your trunk. Okay, being able to keep your trunk where you want it to go when you reach down and you grab something. It's the ability to put your arm over your head in exactly the position that you want. It's the ability to time it. It's to be able to do this when you want it to happen and when you don't want it to happen. It's the ability to pay attention to where your body's moving. It's the ability to adjust how your body's moving. It's the ability to run, to jump, to skip, to hop. Okay, they're very fundamental qualities, but all of the rest of the skills that we want athletes to be able to do are predicated on, are built upon these fundamental skills. Now, we can differentiate between simple and complex fundamental motor skills. So complex fundamental motor skills are things like coordination. So as you have somebody run, it's not just a matter of pushing off the ground hard. It is push off the ground hard while the other knee comes up fast. And then it's rapidly turn off the hip extensor muscles and the knee extensor muscles in an instant so that you can then reposition them and get them out in front of your body at the same time that you went from relaxed on the other side to very, very high amounts of contractile force. And so we need to be able to coordinate this, which is far more difficult than you recognize. It's far more difficult than we give it credit for. But it still hasn't gotten a sport skill yet. Okay, is that if you get really good at simple fundamental motor skills, that makes acquisition of complex motor skills more easy. It also makes it a lot easier for you to do those complex skills. Because let's say that you have somebody that can't maintain trunk stability. They do not have the ability to prevent their body from flopping over. How is that person supposed to be able to bend over and grab something off the ground if they can't keep this stiff, if they can't keep their midsection stiff? No matter how much you drill that technique, if you drill it over and over and over and over, if they don't have the ability to create trunk stability, they're not going to be able to bend over and pick something up off the ground. And if they can't do that, if they can't do this well, how the hell do we expect them to be able to jump well? Or how the hell do we expect them to be able to land well, which in many ways is more difficult than being able to jump well? So we need to think about this as a pyramid, is that the base of the pyramid enables the second layer and the third layer and the fourth layer of the pyramid to be stable and to work the way that it's supposed to. It's only until we have the simple motor skills and the complex fundamental motor skills that we can really, truly, effectively do the sport skills. Okay? And these sport skills are skills that are specific to a given sport, that are specific to a particular sporting activity. So something like shooting free throws. That is something that doesn't exist in any other sport. Okay, with the exception of like netball. Okay, but I mean that's basically basketball without a backboard. Okay, there are some sport skills that will generalize, like being able to throw and to catch. But does being able to throw a baseball generalize to being in track and field? Nope, that's a sport skill. Okay, that is a skill that is useful only for that sport or a certain subset of sports. And so we want to try to differentiate between these because we need to consider the fact that just because you get good at a sport skill doesn't necessarily mean that you're becoming a better athlete. If you remember earlier in the semester, one of the things that I tried to push really hard was the idea of develop an athlete before you develop a golfer, or develop an athlete before you develop a basketball player, develop an athlete before you develop a sprinter or a thrower. Is that the things that make up an athlete are fundamental motor skills. Okay, when we think of somebody who is athletic, they have very high levels of fundamental qualities. They probably throw well, they probably catch well, but they move well. They move differently than a normal person would. Right? They're more coordinated than a normal person. They jump better than a normal person. They run better than a normal person. They land better than a normal person. That doesn't necessarily mean they're a great basketball player or a great soccer player. But they have something about them in the general sense that differentiates them from other people. And that's what we want to try to think about, is that the base of the pyramid, the first and second and third layers, are really made up of this. It's just athleticism. Whereas the sports skills build upon that athleticism. We need to make sure that, especially with kids, we develop athletes first and soccer players second, or baseball players second, or gymnasts second. It's the fundamental motor skills that matter the most because these are the ones that generalize the best. The thing that we want to consider here as well is that complex skill is facilitated by basic skill. Is that if we want somebody to be able to do a jump shot, well, they need to have the skill of shooting the basketball, right? But they need to be able to jump well. They need to have timing. They need to have a little bit of coordination. They need to be able to have a little bit of rhythm. They need to have hand-eye coordination. They need to be able to land well. And that's 3/4 of it. But most of the time, the mistake that we make is that we immediately go to the jump shot and we just assume, oh, we just need to train the jump shot over and over and over and over and over again. But the problem there is if the kid lacks all of those other fundamental qualities that represent the limiting factors for the jump shot, then they're never going to be good at that skill. The other thing that we want to consider is the fact that all of these fundamental skills generalize across sports. Okay, these fundamental skills generalize across sports. We're going to come back to that idea here in a little bit. So I want to show just a quick example here. So this is a girl, and I haven't followed up with her I know she went to a D1 softball program eventually, but this was a girl who was talented enough. She was getting recruited in middle school. Like there were college scouts looking at her in like 6th grade, 7th grade, and obviously she's got a great canvas, right? She's got the genetics, the height, the build, all of that kind of stuff. But she also had really, really early intervention by a very, very talented coach who got her on the right track. So this is at 6th grade. She's like 50-something kilos. This is 67 kilos that she's front squatting here. Does that look difficult in the slightest? No. So how much do you think that her lower body strength is going to interfere with her ability to learn how to run fast, or swing a bat, or be able to push off a base, or be able to throw a ball? Do you think that her lower body strength is going to be a limiting factor at all? No. In fact, it's going to be a major part of her being able to do those skills effectively. It's going to be a major part of her being able to do those skills far better than someone else who may not have that lower body strength. Now, am I saying that all 6th grade girls should be able to do this? The answer is no. Now, in an ideal world, yeah. But is it realistic? No. But this is meant to demonstrate to you that this is going to help a lot. Okay? This is going to make a huge difference long term because she has a very basic skill taken to a very, very high level. Okay? This is something that absolutely will benefit her long term. Yes?
What's a good age to start teaching resistance training for kids? What do you think?
When they're born?
Whatever.
Yeah. Seriously.
Really?
Yeah, I'm absolutely serious. So in infants, okay, infants are supposed to sleep on their back. The standard for where infants are supposed to sleep is on their back. But it's kind of hilariously named is that you're supposed to get plenty of tummy time every day with your kid. You put them on their stomach so that, well, if they're laying right here and they want to see stuff around them, they gotta do this, right? Well, that's done in order to help develop their neck strength so that they can support their head. Because in newborns, they don't have the neck strength yet to support their head. And so every time you pick up a newborn, you have to cradle their head and their neck, right? That's because they don't have neck strength yet. Tummy time is resistance training. Because you put them in a situation where they have to try to lift their head. They have to contract muscle against resistance. It's resistance training. That's all it is. And so, for some reason, with kids, we think, oh no, we don't want them to resist training. We don't do anything. That's what tummy time is. We do this with 3-month-olds, whether we realize it or not. That's resistance training. Okay, and when you grab onto a kid and you hold onto their hands and you have them stand up, okay, that's isometric resistance training. Or you have a kid and you hold on to the hands, or like a jumper. You put them in a jumper and they're in that little thing. They're jumping up and down, right? That's resistance training. They are not strong enough yet to do that with their full body, so you put them in the little jumper thing to reduce their body weight, which then enables them to do that exercise. We just don't call it resistance training. That's the funny thing. But it still falls under the heading of resistance training, is that you are contracting your muscles against resistance. So, yeah, as early as possible. Okay, I mean, you're not going to take a 6-month-old and hand them a barbell. Okay, obviously not. Okay. However, the form that resistance training takes is absolutely something that you can start early. We just don't call it resistance training. We just don't think of it in that way, but it absolutely is. It's muscular contraction against resistance. Okay, you want a 2-3 month old to be able to lift their head eventually? Okay, well you stick them on their tummy so that they have incentive to do it. You just don't call that, all right, we're doing 3 sets of 10 reps of tummy time, right? You don't call it that. But that's what it amounts to. Okay, that's what it amounts to. All right. So this is a quote from a textbook from somebody that's a lot more knowledgeable than I am on this topic. So if you are interested in this topic, if this is something that you want to learn more about, there's an absolutely spectacular textbook. It's called Strength and Conditioning for Young Athletes. I believe they've just come out with their 2nd edition. It's edited by John Oliver and Rotary Lloyd, who are some of the world experts on youth resistance training, on youth sport development. Okay, they are as knowledgeable as anybody out there. Probably the only person worldwide that is more published than them is a guy named Avery Feigenbaum. This is somebody who's been researching youth resistance training since the 80s, when it was evil and God forbid that a kid ever touch a barbell, their knees are going to explode and they're going to die and they're going to be 6 inches shorter than they're supposed to be. He's somebody that's been fighting against that for literally decades at this point. So yeah, it's a great textbook. It's fairly inexpensive. It's like $50 or $60, and it's spectacular. So I'd strongly recommend that you check this out if you want to know about the topic. So let me work through this quote real quick here. Is that the intended outcome is that a physically literate athlete. Now, physical literacy is a kind of broad term that basically means we have somebody who has a broad base of general qualities. It's not necessarily somebody who's a great basketball player, who is a great soccer player, is that they are an athlete. They have those qualities that we would think of as athletic, right? They have a broad base of fundamental motor skill development. The intended outcome is that a physically literate athlete would be able to achieve higher levels of athletic performance in comparison with their physically illiterate counterparts who have not engaged in appropriate training programs. So physical illiteracy is lacking in some or many of those fundamental motor skills. If you have somebody who can't jump well, they're never going to be a good basketball player. Unless they're 7 foot tall. Okay, if you're 7 foot tall and you got no hops, okay, well that's fine because you're a hell of a lot closer to the basket than most normal height individuals are. But even still, that's going to represent a limiting factor for you. If you have somebody who can't throw or who can't catch, they will never ever be a good baseball player. Full stop. Because they lack that fundamental motor skill, they're going to be limited in what they can do. Now, one of the things that's I think is important to consider is that we're talking about the 1% of the 1% of the 1% here. Okay, we're talking about a small segment of the population here when it comes to helping somebody make it to the Olympics. What about everybody else, the 99.9% of people? This is from another textbook called Long-Term Athlete Development. It was written by or co-authored by a guy named Istvan Balyi, who is one of the most eminent writers about long-term athlete development. So if that's a topic that you're interested in, I'd strongly recommend you look him up. There's a lot of great stuff that he's written about this topic. So this is a quote that helps to refer to people that don't continue in sports long-term. Failure to develop physical literacy puts children and youth at a great disadvantage when it comes to full engagement in a range of physical and sport activities. If you can't run, what is the likelihood, or not can't run, if you suck at running, what's the likelihood that you're going to, just for kicks, pick up a sport or participate in a sport that involves a lot of running? Not very good. If you can't catch, what's the likelihood that you're going to go play t-ball? Not very good. If you can't jump, what are the chances you're going to play basketball, or you're going to play volleyball, or you're going to play some other sport that involves jumping? Not very good. And so this is one of the major problems with not developing someone broadly, is that even if they don't continue in sport, and again, this represents an overwhelming percentage of the population, 99.9% of people who don't make it to the Olympics or don't play sports in college, is that if we want them to more easily pick up a lot of different physical activities, we need to make sure that they're halfway decent at a lot of different things. Okay, they don't have to be top 1% in jumping ability or catching ability, but at a minimum, we just don't want them to suck. Yeah, that's really what that comes down to, is we don't want them to suck at it. For me, I am god-awful when it comes to team sports. I don't have the attention span. Okay, I don't have the body awareness. I don't have the ability to keep track of all the things around me. How often do you think I play team sports?
Not often.
Okay, 0.1% of the time. Every once in a while I get talked into it, and then I get in and I play, and then I go, oh my God, this is why I don't do this. Okay, I might play a little bit of volleyball, beach volleyball, because there's only 2 people. I've got one other person aside from myself that I have to pay attention to, but if there's anything more than that, I'm screwed. And so because I lack that ability, that closes off a huge number of types of physical activity and a huge number of things that I might participate in because I'm not good at that. Okay, my hand-eye coordination is not that great. Do you think I play much soccer or basketball or baseball? No, because I'm terrible at it. Okay, I'm really not very good at that. But did I do all right when it came to individual sports? Sure, because I didn't have to pay attention to somebody else aside from myself. It was awesome. Okay, I didn't have to deal with all the rest of that stuff. I didn't have to deal with fine motor control. Pick up a barbell, lift as much, put as much weight on as I can, and then squat down, stand back up. Cool. Okay, that's something I can do fairly easily because it works with the skills that I have. But because I lack those other things, those are more or less closed off to me because I suck so bad at it. Is there anybody in here who can honestly say that they enjoy doing a type of physical activity that you are garbage at? Is there anybody in here that can honestly say that? And if there is a type of physical activity that you do anyway, if you're really honest with yourself, you kind of have to force yourself to do it. You know what I mean? Okay. And so that's a hurdle. Okay, that's something that is getting in the way of you participating in that physical activity. And so with kids, if we want to set them up for maximum success in sport, we want broad base of fundamental development. If we want non-athletes to as easily as possible step into a broad range of physical activity, we want them as broadly developed as possible. But we idiot Americans, what do we do with our PE hours? We cut them. I mean, even when I was in elementary school, I think we got, let's see, in elementary school, I think we had PE like twice a week for like an hour. That's garbage. Okay, that is it's better than nothing. But is that anywhere near enough to make sure that we're as fit as we should be as kids? No. Yeah, I'm sure that as far as I know, it's gotten worse. And it's getting cut from middle schools and high schools. Well, we're losing ground in science to other countries. We're losing ground in math to other countries. So what do? Put more time towards those things? Well, it turns out the research is super duper clear that if we give kids lots of physical activity, they do better in all of the other subjects. Okay, boys are losing ground. Okay, not just because girls are being catapulted ahead. So there's a lot of barriers that are being removed for girls within education, which is spectacular. That is an absolutely amazing thing. But boys are losing ground, not just because they're being outpaced by girls, but because they're actually getting worse. Okay, they're declining. And one of the things that it would not surprise me in the slightest that is a huge impediment to that is decreasing amount of physical activity. So stuff like ADHD and otherwise are much higher in boys than it is in girls. Great way to deal with that is by getting physical exercise. So boys that on average tend to be more active and get out and do more things and more physical and all that kind of stuff. I'm totally generalizing here. I'm talking in terms of averages. I'm not trying to say all boys are this way, all girls are this way. Yeah, I'm not saying that. But on average, if you take somebody who's got a lot of energy and wants to get it out, and then you take away their outlet for that, is it any surprise that they act up? Is it any surprise that they don't do as well in a situation where sit down, shut up, stop moving? Kind of hard to do when you're not tired. Kind of hard to do when you haven't done anything physical. So that's I don't want to get too much on a pedestal here, but for a lot of reasons, cutting PE is a terrible idea. And not just for health concerns, not just for sport concerns. Okay, for a lot of other reasons aside from that, is that more exercise means better brain function. More exercise means less acting out. More exercise means you do better in school, which is true for K through 12, which is true for college students too. Okay, it's true for adults too. All right, so why else do we want to work on fundamental motor skills in kids? Okay, one of the big reasons is that kids are sponges. Kids pick up skills really, really fast. they have a very, very high degree of something called neuroplasticity. And so neuroplasticity basically means how well your brain changes and how capable your brain is in making changes. Kids are extremely plastic. If you teach them motor skills, they pick them up really fast. Which means that if we want a kid to have a broad base of skill, then we want them to acquire those skills in a time when it's much easier for them to learn. Learning skills as an adult is a lot harder. Learning new motor skills is much more difficult than as an adult. With a kid, you're going to learn it 3, 4, 5, 10 times as fast. So we might as well take advantage of that window of opportunity and teach them as much as we can so that they have that as a base to jump off of later in their life. Okay? So what this means for us is that in childhood, we want to spend a lot of time working on fundamental motor skills. We want kids to be working on crawling, walking, skipping, galloping, throwing. We want them doing all kinds of stuff. Which means that we don't take a 5-year-old and have them focus 100% on soccer. That's a terrible mistake. Have them focus 100% on baseball. That's a terrible mistake. Because it doesn't give them the opportunity to develop a broad range of motor skills. We need them to develop lots of motor skills. We need to develop a broad range of motor skills. And so if we don't put them into a lot of different activities, they're not going to develop these as effectively. What it means is that for really, really young kids, 5 and under, we need to spend less time throwing them in front of a device. And I'm a huge technology buff. Okay, I've been learning programming for fun. Like I'm that type of person. Like I do that because it's fun. But even take it from somebody like me is that we need less technology time. We need less screen time with young kids to get them out and work on these qualities because it's meaningful for their health. It's meaningful for their brain. It's meaningful for their long-term sport success. We also want to make sure that in childhood we ensure that kids are strong enough that doesn't represent a limiting factor in the things that they want to be able to do. Is that kids have to be strong enough. We have to make sure that kids are getting development in the quality of muscular strength. This doesn't necessarily mean barbells and dumbbells, but it does mean resistance training in some capacity. And so later in this talk, we'll talk about a little bit about what this might look like and how it might work. So in adolescence, this is when we should start to focus on sport skills. This doesn't mean that we don't work on sport skills until adolescence, but what this means is that we don't put a major priority on sport skills until adolescence. Okay, we want kids in a lot of different sports. Okay, we want them to learn how to kick a soccer ball, learn how to run around and to play, and learn how to play basketball, but not because it's going to make them a great basketball player or a great baseball player, but because it develops them broadly. So the focus prior to adolescence is not building them into a particular type of athlete, but building them into an athlete, which means broad development is a wonderful thing. So in childhood, putting them in a lot of different sports is a great idea. Something like track and field for kids is spectacular, is absolutely spectacular. Because amongst kids, they don't focus them on any one particular event. They do a bunch of different things. They learn how to throw the shot put, they learn how to throw the disc, they learn how to throw javelin, they learn how to do high jump, they learn how to do long jump, they learn how to do some of the sprint events, some of the middle distance events, the long distance events. Which means that you are broadly training a kid to run well, to jump well, to throw well. Think that's a good idea? Yeah. Something like gymnastics is spectacular. Neither of my parents were athletes. Not even close. But to their credit, they threw me in a shitload of different sports. They put me in t-ball. I lasted 2 seasons. I was garbage at it. Hey, but I did it. They put me in swimming. Yeah, it was okay. But hey, you know what? I'm still a pretty strong swimmer, despite not continuing on a swim team or anything. They put me in gymnastics. I have those goofy little pictures of me, like here in a leotard. Yeah. You want to talk about something embarrassing to have around your house when you're trying to bring a potential significant other home, and then there's a picture of you at like 7 years old in a leotard. Yeah, that goes over really well. Yeah. But as a result of that, I'm a strong swimmer. As a result of that, I can still do stuff like cartwheels. Yeah, even 22, 23 years later. As a powerlifter, at my biggest, I could do a front handspring. At like 300 pounds, I could do a front handspring. Why? Not because I was an amazing athlete then, but because I had developed those skills early on. And so that set me up for a lot of success in other sports. There were a lot of false starts. I got into a lot of sports that didn't treat me very well, but I also was able to do reasonably well in other sports. Okay? And a lot of that I can trace back to having that broad base of skill development. So it's a really, really good idea to set kids up for by giving them a lot of different things. Okay, and so in adolescence, this is when we really want to push basic and complex sports skills, when we really want to push strength and power development. Okay, we want to push strength development in childhood, but we especially want to push it during adolescence. Why? Because kids are growing like weeds. Because they are getting really tall, really fast. They're putting on a lot of weight really fast, which means that we need to make sure that their strength keeps up with their weight gain. We need to make sure that their strength keeps up with their body size gain. And so if you have a kid who gains 5 or 6 inches over a few months and they don't end up any stronger, their ability to control their body is going to significantly reduce because they now have extra size, extra body mass without extra strength to be able to handle that. So particularly in adolescence, strength training is ridiculously important to make sure that at a bare minimum, we don't lose ground in motor skills and we don't lose ground in the ability for people to control their bodies, the ability of adolescents to control their bodies by virtue of high amounts of growth. This is especially true for females because in males, with that high amount of testosterone comes a whole lot of muscle gain. And so by virtue of the fact that they have high amounts of testosterone, that causes high amounts of muscle gain, which means increases in strength. But for females, they gain a lot more fat than they do lean body mass, which means that we especially need to help out adolescent females maintain their strength or gain strength as much as possible through adolescence so that they're not losing ground because they don't get the benefit of that increased or of the degree of increased lean body mass that males do. We follow? Unfortunately, who on average gets less resistance training during adolescence, males or females? Females. And we keep coming back to this idea that they're the ones that need it the most. They're the ones that need it more. By virtue of the fact of having a whole bunch of testosterone, all right, you're gonna put on a whole bunch of muscle mass, you're gonna get stronger purely by virtue of the fact that your testes are now producing a shitload of testosterone. Great. And even though testosterone levels in females also go up due to aromatization of estrogen, it doesn't go up anywhere near as much, not even close to the amount that it goes up in males. And so that puts females at a strength disadvantage as they go through adolescence, which is why we especially want to try to target that. Okay, so in adolescence, we want to work on sport-specific fitness, so working on qualities that are specific to the sport that they're beginning to specialize in. But even still, in adolescence, they should not be a one-sport athlete. They should not be at this point. Okay, it depends on the sport, to be honest. If we're talking about something like gymnastics, they go to the Olympics at 16. Okay, they are vying for national championships at 13, 14 years old. Their timeline is shifted earlier. But for virtually all other sports, at least American sports, I can't speak to as much about sports that are popular in other countries. I don't know the systems as well. But at least for American sports, the first time that in the American sports that high levels of competition happen occurs in high school. And then you don't get truly competitive parts of that until college, which means that we really don't need to specialize all that much until high school rolls around. Because it's only until high school that they're going to see any meaningful kind of competition, which goes against what most people think, is that, well, if we got a baseball player, we want to make sure they play baseball in high school, so we got to do baseball all the time. That's the only thing that they do from age 5 and 6 onward. But that's a huge mistake, because the evidence is pretty clear that it doesn't work as well. So it doesn't, doing only baseball from birth onward doesn't really increase the likelihood that you're going to play baseball in the high school level, the college level. But also, let me ask you, how many of you rode out the same sport from the beginning to the end? How many of you that started out in a sport at 5 or 6 years old continued in that same sport until you completed? So Warren, what did you start in?
Cross country.
Cross country? So you rode cross country all the way through?
All the way up to here.
Okay. So that's not super duper common. Did you do other sports along the way?
Yeah, I did.
Okay. So that's great. That's great. That means that you're not going to end up like the stereotypical cross country runner that can run this way reasonably well, but sucks in every other direction. Okay, that's good. That means for your long-term health and probably for your success as a cross country runner, you're better off. Anybody else? Okay, so we've got you guys here. What other sports did you play?
Basketball.
Okay, you played basketball. What else did you guys play?
Football.
Football? Okay, anything else? Okay, but you didn't only do baseball. Okay, and so I think this is a kind of common lesson here, is that most of the time we get people that are involved in different sports. Try to think back to what you were passionate about as a 5 or 6 year old. Okay, the thing that you love more than anything, the thing that you wanted to do all of the time. Try to remember what that is. Do you still have those same priorities? I mean, eat something yummy, take a nap, sort of. Okay. But not really. You have different priorities. You have different things that you want to pursue. Is that your interests change a ton over the course of childhood and over the course of adolescence. They change a ton. And so the reality is that if you have a kid who only ever plays baseball from age 5 on, the likelihood that they continue in that sport is not that high. We have some examples here, but U4, and I thought I saw another hand over here. So U5 are kind of self-selected because you're college athletes. And so on average, you're going to tend to have that situation more often. But I don't mean this as an insult in any respect, but this is D2. This is small D2. Okay? It's a different story than say elite D1. If we're talking about somebody who's making it to NCAA, D1 NCAA nationals, right? That's a massively different level of competition. They are massively different baseball players than any of you are. Okay, the cross-country runners that are at the biggest schools in the country, at SEC schools and ACC schools, they're in a class themselves. They're not even the same breed of human as you are. Okay, the basketball players that are at Kentucky or at oh my God, I keep trying to say URock at oh my God, Northeast School, UConn. Thank you. There you go. I'm transposing all the letters in my head. Right, it's like it's a different breed of people. Yes, they are technically still Homo sapiens sapiens, but they're just different. They're built differently than the rest of us. They got a couple extra attribute points when it came to putting together their character sheets. I mean, they're compared to the rest of us, the normal folks. So what's interesting is that on average in those groups, they tend not to only do single sports. Okay, they tend not to, and I'm going to show you some data that indicates that. Yes.
I was going to say, do you think they also did resistance training at a very young age?
Hopefully, yes. But one of the things that's kind of interesting about really, really high-level athletes is that often they succeed in spite of. Okay, often they succeed in spite of. Is that I've come across a lot of very, very good athletes that have glaring deficiencies. And often they can make it up to a certain level, but then because they have such a big deficiency, they can't make it past that because of that deficiency. One of the most just absolutely just raw talent football players I've ever had the chance to work with. I mean, this kid was just absolutely incredibly talented. He could have been amazing. But he was a great athlete from the neck down. And so unfortunately, he never really had somebody to help him work on a lot of the mental skills that are necessary to be a great athlete. That was his deficiency. And so even though from here down he had all of the raw talent I think that had someone intervened with him and helped shape this better, I think he could have been easily an NFL prospect, easily. But he was missing out on a major area. I worked with a couple of female soccer players from Ireland. They were on full rides at a large D1 program, and their skill level was here. Okay, the rest of the team's skill level was here. By far, their biggest detriment to their ability to continue on was that they were weak as hell, they were slow as hell, their conditioning sucked. Okay, they were spectacular soccer players, just that much better than all the rest of the competition. But they're never going to make it beyond that level because they were lacking in the physical qualities. And so over 4 years, they developed those physical qualities and ended up doing very, very well. And a couple of them are still playing in some of the smaller pro leagues in Europe. But that caused them to top out at a certain level. And they would not have continued on if they didn't have the physical side to go with their skill side. So they were kind of making up for a lack of physical qualities by having their skill level so good. But no offense to any soccer players in here, but our best soccer talent is nowhere near as good as the best European soccer talent. On average, our soccer talent in the U.S. is nowhere near as good as the average European soccer talent. And so a lot of times, U.S. schools will recruit European soccer players because their skill level is that much higher than the rest of the American kids that they've been recruiting. That's just kind of the way it goes. So if you want to make it to the Olympics, you got to be the whole package. Yeah, if you want to make it to the World Championships, you got to be the whole package. You can't just be great at this one part of that. You have to have everything. Okay, and so I would say on average they do, especially now. It's gotten a lot better, but it's still lacking. And I'll show you some more data on that. One of the things that we're hoping to have happen is that we want people to peak later. Often we end up in situations with kids where they follow the curve on the left. So you see how steep that curve is? They make change very, very quickly. They get better very, very quickly. But you notice that their peak is very short. It's also not as high as the other peaks. Okay, it happens a lot faster, but it's not as long, and it happens lower than the other peaks do. This is something that we see time and time again on the short term, on the long term, is that when we have athletes that gain gain abilities faster than they should, they're going to get better fast, but they're going to tend to peak earlier. And so we can kind of think about this in the same sort of terms. Is that imagine you have a kid who from 4, 5, 6 years old only ever does baseball. Okay, maybe that kid gets better really, really fast and happens to go to like the Little League World Series. But the proportion of kids that are playing in the Little League World Series that make it to the MLB is pretty darn small. They're the kids that are falling on the left. On the other hand, if you take a kid and instead of only focusing on baseball, maybe they start baseball at 5, but they do other sports in the off season. And they do that all the way up until high school. And maybe even in high school, maybe they do another sport. So they're getting that broad base of skill development so that by the time they make it to high school, they've got a much bigger base of athleticism. They're going to be a lot more versatile. On average, they're going to be able to be more successful. They're going to be the situation on the right. And hopefully the likelihood that they're going to get to play in college is going to be a lot higher. They didn't get as good early on, but that doesn't matter. I don't know about you, but I don't want to be in a situation where I peak at 10 years old. I don't want the peak of my athletic prowess to occur at 10 years old. I don't know about you. Maybe the one thing that you regret from your childhood is not playing in the Little League World Series. But I would much rather be able to say, hey, you know what? I was a college athlete. That's a much bigger and better pool of people to be able to say that you are a part of. Okay. Not to mention it comes with a bunch of other benefits, right? Okay, potentially scholarships, okay, homework help, getting to go all over the country, getting to have a ton of experiences that other people don't tend to get. And that's a pretty amazing opportunity. I would much rather be a college athlete than be able to play in the Little League World Series, hands down. So we want the situation on the right. So the data that supports this is pretty good. One of the major concerns, one of the reasons that this kind of thing might happen, so the situation on the left, is that the risk of social isolation is very high if you have kids that only ever do one thing. If they only ever play baseball or they only ever play soccer, they're going to end up being around the same people all the time. They're going to end up being around the same coaches all the time, the same parents all the time, the same friends all the time. And if we want kids that are able to handle lots of different situations, be able to handle different kinds of people, be able to empathize with people from other walks of life than them, well, do you think it's a good idea to only expose them to the same things all the time? There's a lot of talk about mental toughness. Well, one of the best ways, in my opinion, to develop mental toughness is put kids in novel situations and help them navigate that. If you only ever put them in situations that they're accustomed to, i.e. baseball all the time and only baseball all the time, that's not a great way to develop mental toughness. That's not a great way to help them get used to things being different than what they expect. And not to get all political, but we have a major problem in our country of people not being able to understand people from other walks of life. Okay? Not being able to see outside of their little tiny community. So when you have somebody who grew up in a teeny tiny little town of 2,000 and has never moved beyond the county they grew up in of 5,000, is it any surprise that they don't know what it's like to empathize with somebody from another state or another country or another, just something that makes it different? It's not that surprising. It's really not. And so we want to try to create situations where kids aren't isolated, where they are being exposed to a lot of different things and they're much more capable of handling a broad range of things. Particularly so if they're not going to stay an athlete the rest of their life, which again is 99.99999% of people. So by involving them in multiple sports, they get different people, different coaches, different scenarios, okay, which is going to be a lot better for their development long term. One of the other concerns is burnout. In childhood, we want kids to be, if at all possible, we want them to be self-motivated because we want them to learn to love their sport. We want them to learn to love training. We want them to be hungry for being involved in their sport. And the reality of a kid who's 5 years old and they only ever play baseball, okay, I'm going to stereotype a little bit, but that has a hell of a lot to do with their father. Because it's usually the dads that are wanting to relive their own shitty childhood baseball career and through their kids. So they're dropping a couple of grand a month so they can have a pitching coach at 6. That's ridiculous. Okay, that is completely ridiculous. On the other hand, if you have a kid who does a season of baseball and then they go into soccer, well then they're going to look forward to soccer because they didn't have soccer all the time. And then when the soccer season is done, then they go into basketball. They're going to look forward to basketball because it's not something they do all the time. And then by the time they make it all the way back around to baseball, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited to go back in baseball again. I can't wait to see the coach. I can't wait to see those same friends. Can't wait to be around that environment again. Because if you don't have it, you're going to miss it. Okay, the old adage, how can I miss you if you never go away? Okay, there's some truth to that. Is it by taking away something from the kid and saying, you can't have this all the time, it makes it even better. Because then that's something that they really, really want. And so the chances of burnout happening are going to be a lot less. The other thing here is related to overuse injury. In this country, there is an epidemic of overuse injuries in kids. Once upon a time, there was a surgery called a Tommy John surgery. Tommy John surgery is a surgery that is to repair your ulnar collateral ligament. This is something that used to only occur in pros. So by throw, you get tons and tons of accumulated damage here and accumulated stress, and then finally, so the Tommy John surgery is a surgery to take tendon, take ligament from elsewhere in your body and reposition it. Okay, and put that back in place to repair that area. That happens in kids. That happens in like 6, 7, 8-year-olds. Why? Because they throw too freaking much. Okay, Little League, and actually I don't, is it Little League? I'm trying to think of what the overarching organization is. Is it just called Little League? I thought it was like Little League of America or something like that, but I don't know. So Little League, they've initiated pitch counts. Okay, which are there to limit how often kids can pitch. To make sure that when you have a 6-year-old whose arm is nowhere near well developed enough to have the same throwing volume that a pro pitcher would, they've initiated those pitch counts in order to make sure that it's basically saving the kid from their parent, saving the kid from the coach. That's why those pitch counts exist. But what do those idiot overbearing parents do? They get them a pitching coach and then they put them on a travel league so that they end up doing double, triple, quadruple the pitch count that they were supposed to be limited to. Those pitch counts are there because of good reasons, to help minimize the chances that kids get injuries. Kids should not be getting overuse injuries, full stop. They should not be getting overuse injuries. But the problem is when you take a body that is underdeveloped and not ready to handle that, and then you only subject them to the same stress over and over and over and over and over, is it any big surprise that kids end up with injuries due to overuse? Not at all. There's even parents, and I have not personally heard this, but I have heard of other, it's total hearsay. So it was somebody else that heard parents talking about this. Talking about looking at Tommy John surgery as a good thing, because there's a little bit of data to suggest that pitching velocity goes up after Tommy John surgery amongst MLB pitchers and college pitchers. So parents are looking at their kid and they're going, hey, you know what? Maybe it wouldn't be the bad thing if they had to get Tommy John surgery. Is there anything more sociopathic than that? Is that I want my kid to have a soft tissue injury so that they can get an invasive surgery to help their future baseball career? That's not the mark of a good parent. That's as weak of a statement as I could possibly make. That is not the mark of a good parent. That is not the type of mentality that we want to see. ACL tears in little girls has skyrocketed. Hip injuries amongst female soccer players is way, way, way higher than it used to be. And that's probably attributable to not having a broad base of development, not playing in a bunch of different sports, not allowing their bodies to rest from only doing soccer or only doing softball or only doing one particular sport. And so remember that each sport comes with a specific set of stressors. Okay, so for a pitcher, okay, especially if they're more of a sidearm pitcher, they're going to have repeated stress in this area. And so if you only ever play baseball year-round, you're subjecting that person's ulnar collateral ligament to the same stress year-round, rather than 3 or 4 months of throwing, then move on to something else. Let it rest, let it heal, let it get back to where it was. Okay, and so overuse injury is a very, very real risk that we want to try to avoid. One of the other downsides to early sports specialization is that it results in lack of preparedness. Okay, for succeeding at a higher level. This is data based upon a survey that was done. So it was published in 2014. I think it was 2012 or 2013 that they collected the data. And what they did is they surveyed D1 strength and conditioning coaches. And they asked them, what are the areas that your incoming freshmen are lacking in? What are the areas that they need extra work? And these are percentages of coaches that talked about these different themes. So 37% of these coaches said that they lack Olympic lifting technique. 33% said that they lack core and lower extremity strength. 23% said that they lack flexibility and mobility. 23% said that they lacked mental toughness. 23% said that they lacked a knowledge of exercise technique and recovery. 20% said that they lacked work capacity. These are all basic qualities. These are all things that would come from taking less training time towards a particular sport and working on general qualities. That's really what this comes down to. Somebody who doesn't have any experience with Olympic lifting technique, that's because they never spent any time working on it. Somebody whose work capacity sucks, that's because they didn't spend any time working on it. Somebody whose flexibility sucks, they didn't take a break from their sport to work on that general quality. And so we now have we have athletes that are entering at the D1 level who, instead of spending their first year getting better, they're having to basically do a remedial strength and conditioning year to work on all of those qualities that they should have had in the first place. So instead of them, getting better, they're spent working on the things that they lack, which I think is a huge problem. And I think is something that is absolutely going to limit them in how far they can make it in their sport. Because now, instead of having 4 dedicated years of them getting better, it's 1 year of remedial work, working on all the basic shit that they should have had in the first place, and then 3 years of hard training getting them better. Do we see the difference there? That 1 extra year can make a gigantic difference in how far that they can push their success long term. In the 2016 NFL draft, 88.5% of draftees played more than one sport. 88.5% played more than one sport. Only 11.5% only played football in high school. This isn't over their entire childhood and adolescence. This is in high school. 88.5% played multiple sports in high school. I think that's pretty telling, isn't it? Is it? And I'm not saying that this is going to guarantee you're going to make it to the NFL draft, but if we're talking, these are the best of the best football players that this country has to offer. And almost 90% of them do multiple sports in high school. There's something to that. Okay? There's definitely something to that. So this brings us to what's called the long-term athlete development model. And essentially what this model is built for is to help ensure that we're putting kids in a lot of different sports. We're putting kids in a lot of different activities. We're helping to develop them such that they have a broad base of fundamental motor skill acquisition. Now this is broken up roughly into age categories. These are not meant to be hard and fast. These are not meant to be as soon as you go from age 6 to 7, then you're automatically in the fundamental stage. It's not meant to work that way. These are meant to be general guidelines. They're meant to give you a general guideline for how to work with different kids. This is up, by the way, so you don't have to maniacally copy all of these down. So the active start stage, this is meant to not involve much in the way of sport yet, but just to make sure kids are moving. They're going out and they're playing tag. They're going out and they're climbing trees. They're going out and they're playing on the jungle gym. They're going out and they're being active in a lot of different ways. This is not they are sitting down for 8 hours a day playing Call of Duty. Okay, they are out doing lots and lots of things. Okay, yes, they can sit around and play a few hours of video games. The research is pretty clear. It doesn't harm kids. But if it comes at the cost of physical activity, that's when we want to worry. If it comes at the cost of doing homework and all that kind of stuff, then we want to worry. So we want to make sure that kids are spending as long as possible doing things outdoors, being active, goofing off, running around. And actually, as a little side note, interestingly, there's some emerging research that unsupervised play amongst 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds is actually a really good thing. It's good for psychological skills. It's good for learning how to empathize, learning how to work within groups without a parent there to supervise. And I don't have a kid yet, so maybe it's easy for me to say this. As research indicates that, so maybe if I'm in that stage and I'm going, oh my God, I can't imagine walking away from my kid. But there's some research that indicates that that's probably a good thing. So we want kids out and exploring and doing lots and lots of different kinds of physical activity. When we get to the fundamental stage, this is where we get a little bit more structured, where kids are now entering sport for the first time. They are learning to do different types of fundamental motor skills, but the focus is on enjoyment. The focus is on having a good time. The focus is on helping them learn that physical activity is enjoyable. Physical activity is a good thing. You like to be here. You like to do this. You like to play soccer and run and jump because it's a rewarding activity. And this is a critical aspect of sport in this time, that it's fun. It's not training yet. So we're not trying to train them. We are not trying to make them into any particular type of athlete. We want to give them a really broad exposure to sport so that they learn to like it. And they learn to have a good time. And they learn that this is an enjoyable thing. Okay, think back to the last time you raced a friend for something. Okay, think back to the last, maybe somebody called shotgun and you said, no, not if I make it to the door first. Think about what that feels like. Think about how exhilarating that is when you're racing against somebody and you're running as hard as you can, and you can feel like the pressure in your chest because you're breathing hard and your legs are starting to burn a little bit, but you're looking out of the corner of your eye and you see that person just like edge to edge with you. You know what I'm talking about? Okay, you really start to think about that. I can see some smiles that are starting to creep on your faces because you know that feels good. We want to try to create situations for kids where they have that and they go, oh, this is awesome. I love running. I love racing against my friends. We want to create situations where they love that. Not, well, I got to throw 200 times because my pitching coach said I had to. You see the difference between those? One of them is work. One of them is fun. We want to try to create fun as much as possible. Then when we get to the learn to train stage, this is where it's a little bit more related to work, but the purpose isn't necessarily to make them into the best athlete that they can be. The purpose is to teach them how to train hard, is to teach them how to train hard, and to learn to love to train, to learn to love that feeling where you ran a lap as fast as you can and you're gasping for air and your heart's racing and you go, man, that was awesome. Yeah, I'm tired. Yeah, my muscles hurt, but that was awesome. Okay, or they just did a new exercise for the first time, or they've been practicing their deadlift technique for forever, and they finally get it, and it finally clicks, and they go, oh my gosh, that was so easy, that was awesome. Okay, so they're learning to train, they're learning to love to train. They're learning what that feels like. Then when they get a little bit early, so actually, sorry, I want to before I move on, is that in the learn to train stage, they are still being a part of their sport, but the focus is not winning. The focus is not winning at that age, which is a very difficult thing to, especially for parents, to get them to wrap their idea around. Is that every parent of an 11-year-old wants to be able to brag to their friends, oh yeah, my 11-year-old's team, they kicked the shit out of the 10-year-olds in this other team. Is that really a healthy attitude? Not exactly. On the other hand, hey, you know what? My kid has gotten so much better at soccer. They absolutely love it, and they just wake up in the morning and they start or they woke up at 5 a.m. so that they could watch some Bundesliga footage, or they woke up early so they could watch the European Championships of soccer. They love the sport that much. That's a much different situation. That's a kid that's going to stick with it. That's a kid that's going to stay with it rather than the one whose parent, win at all costs. Okay, when you have parents that are swearing at their kids, that are saying kill them, that kind of thing, that is not a healthy attitude. That is not a great way to teach somebody how to exist in a world that kind of requires cooperation. Those are going to be the sociopathic CEOs that are like, hey, I don't care if I'm going to kill a bunch of people by taking all of the water out of the water table. I'm just going to do it anyway so I can sell more water bottles. Okay, you end up with people like that. So the train-to-train stage, this is where we're actively trying to make people better. They are not training because it's fun. They're not training because it's good. It still should be fun in some respects, but they're doing it so they can get better. They are practicing soccer so they can become a better soccer player. They are lifting so that they can become stronger. They are training for the sake of training so they can make those qualities as good as possible. In the train-to-compete stage, they're training hard and they're competing hard, and they are trying to win, but that isn't the only thing that they're trying to do. Okay, that isn't the only thing that they're trying to do. Okay, is that it's in this stage that we really want them to learn what it's like to compete. We really want them to learn what it's like to be under the very, very high stress of competition. We want them to know what it's like to lose gracefully. We want them to know what it's like to win gracefully. We want them to know how to navigate the stress of new situations and tough opponents and all of that. Those are skills that we want them to develop. So that by the time they make it to stage 6 and the train to win, they have the ability to compete. They know how to compete well. They know how to train hard. They know how to push themselves hard. They know what it means to train. They know what it means to compete, and they do it well. They do it effectively. They've got the right approach to it. Okay, they're not focusing on just beating people. They're instead focusing on, hey, you know what? Did I give everything that I possibly had? Did I do everything right? And I lost anyways? Okay, I'm okay with that. Okay, learning to have mentalities like that is really, really critical by the time they make it to the train to win stage. But again, you want to think about this as a pyramid, is that we've got the base of the pyramid in the active start, which builds and it builds and it builds. So where this leaves us is, this is a schematic that's meant to demonstrate the entire population. So everything across the x-axis, okay, everything across the x-axis, that represents all of the population. On the y-axis is across the lifespan of the population. And so you'll notice that we go all the way across on the active start, the fundamental stage, and the learn to train stage. In an ideal world, everybody has an active start. Everybody is developing a broad range of qualities. Everybody learns to love exercise and learns to love playing sports and learns to love physical activity in the fundamental stage. Everybody learns how to train, how to exercise. They learn that they like to exercise, they like to push themselves. They know what it feels like to run against their friend and compete against their friends. And they know that it's a good feeling when they do that. And then we start to split, because only a part of the population is going to end up in the train-to-train stage and continue in organized sport. An even smaller is going to end up in the train-to-compete stage, and even smaller is going to end up in the train-to-win stage. But in an ideal world, they have hit all of these markers along the way to maximize the chances that they're going to go very, very far in the train-to-win stage. But also, it ensures that everybody that ends up in this competitive for life category, so they may not go to college and compete, but maybe they still do intramurals. Maybe they go play pickup soccer at Marina Elementary School on Sunday afternoons. I can't tell you how happy that makes me when I drive past that and I see a bunch of adults out there playing soccer. That's amazing. That's absolutely amazing. Those are people who, for fun, go out and do physical activity. That's great. Okay, they want to go out and they want to compete. And then the rest of people that fall into kind of the active for life category, ideally they've got that broad base of skill development, that broad base of fundamental motor skill development that enables them to make physical activity decisions based on what they like and what they want to do and what's fun for them and what's rewarding for them, instead of what they can do and what they can't do. And so hopefully what I've illustrated so far is that by getting this broad base of development, it helps both parties. It helps the ones who stay in sports and the ones who don't. Actually look at the proportions of children that continue on to pro sports. So what we're looking at here are so each of those percentages up there, that is the number of people in that particular pro sport divided by the total number of people between the ages of 6 and 17 that are in that sport. Okay, so high school, middle school, elementary school. And so the percentage of pros relative to how many are involved between the ages of 6 and 17 for the WNBA, 0.0065%. Okay, 0.007 of a percent is the number that make it into the NBA or the WNBA. Okay, 0.02 of a percent are who make it into the MLB, and for the MLB, that's counting single A, double A, triple A ball. Okay, and the unfortunate reality of everybody who is not in the Big Show, who has not made it all the way up to the MLB, is they make dirt. Okay, they make absolute dirt. If you're talking about some of the lowest level farm leagues, they might make a couple $100 a game, which comes nowhere near even covering your costs. So yes, you are technically a pro baseball player because you get paid to play, but you get paid peanuts. Yeah, you get paid absolute garbage. And so that 0.02 of a percent looks really awesome compared to making it into the NBA or the WNBA. But there's also a heck of a lot larger of a there's a lot more players that make it into the pro level, but the reality is the vast majority of them are in the developmental leagues, which is not that great. It's not something that's sustainable for the rest of your life. The percent that make it into the NFL, 0.06 of a percent. That's the highest chances out of all of them, but we don't have anywhere near the same number of people who play like Pee Wee football and that kind of thing. The other thing is that just like the NBA, the NFL is very much going to self-select. Is that the people who are tall and big have a much greater likelihood of making it in. So if you're 5'3" and built like this, you may have all the skill in the world, but the chances that you're going to be able to make it into the NFL or anything for that matter is going to be very, very unlikely. So the moral of the story is this is a very, very small segment of the population, so the probability that kids are actually going to make it to the pros is very, very low. The probability that they're going to make it to college to play that sport is a lot better, but it's still not that high. Okay? It's still really not that high. And so we need to be thinking about this in terms of how do we maximize the chances they're going to go far in any sport, but also how can we serve them for the rest of their lives? Because the reality of sport participation and physical activity participation is that if you're at least a little bit good at something, you're more likely to do it. Okay? If you're absolute garbage at a particular type of exercise, you're not going to want to do it because then you have all of the normal barriers to exercise plus the fact that you suck at it, okay? Which is a pretty large barrier. Okay? It takes that much more effort to go and do an activity that you suck at versus doing an activity that you're halfway decent at. So we want to try to minimize the barriers to exercise as much as possible. Well, one of the easy ways of doing that is to set up good habits from the beginning, set up good motor skills from the beginning, because it's gonna remove one of the major ones. So in terms of our recommendations for resistance training in kids, we're going to focus on youth that are less than 15 to 16 years old. And the reason we're going to do this is because once you hit 15 or 16, once you hit that train to compete stage, well, once you hit that point, you are basically an adult. Okay, and we can treat you like an adult. So the training that we do once you enter stage 5 is that you are going to train exactly the same way that you've been learning all semester. Whereas things are going to be a little bit different when it comes to kids in stage 1, stage 2, stage 3, stage 4. Now, we really don't need truly structured resistance training in the active start stage. I can't remember, was it this class or the other class that we talked about tummy time? It was this class, okay. And so, I mean, a lot of the things that we have kids do amounts to resistance training, but we're not really doing it in a structured fashion. We're not really coming up with a resistance training program for an 18-month-old. But a lot of the stuff that they do amounts to resistance training. And so having activities where the kids have to use their muscles and coming up with activities where they are challenging their ability to use their muscles, that's a great thing. But the primary thing that we want from 0 to 5, 0 to 6 is really just making sure that kids are doing tons and tons and tons of different kinds of physical activity. Is that we're trying to create as well-rounded of a kid as we possibly can. So playing tag and obstacle courses, some organized sport is fine. Going out for hikes and climbing trees and just running around and playing street hockey and just getting out and doing stuff, going and playing pickup basketball or handball or dodgeball or kickball or whatever, as long as it involves them running around, having a good time, staying active, and having to move. In stages 2, 3, and 4, this is where we have some opportunity to do a little bit more structured exercise, a little bit more structured resistance training. But before we really dig into how we do that, I think it's important that we consider some of the benefits that can come from it. And so these are all based on research. These are all supported by multiple studies. Each one of these different points, I've only put in one study here, but there's quite a few of them. Okay, there's quite a few studies supporting every one of these points. So kids can absolutely increase their muscular strength through resistance training. And it's not just barbells and dumbbells. They can increase their strength with body weight, medicine balls, elastic bands, free weights. Okay, they can get stronger with any kind of external resistance. We know that we can improve bone density in children as well. So a normal child over the course of their childhood will increase their bone mineral density purely due to growth. However, if we add in physical activity to that mix, we will increase how much improvement and how much gain in bone mineral density they experience. So imagine that we have a kid who has an average American childhood. Okay, average American childhood, so from birth out to about age 25 or 30. And let's put it about like this. Their bone mineral density is going to increase. On the other hand, if we have a kid who is involved in a lot of physical activity, they're going to gain more bone mineral density over the course of their childhood. So let's make this as dashed lines. So by the time they hit age 25 or so, they're going to end up with a higher bone mineral density as a result of all that physical activity. If you have a kid that also adds resistance training into the mix, they're going to end up in a situation like this, where by age 25, they have an even higher bone mineral density. Now, if we are talking about a kid who is very much one of those children who is bringing down the average physical activity, because one of the things that we've seen over the past few decades is that physical activity rates in kids has gone down. And well, averages go down because there are people pulling the average down. So if you have a kid that is contributing to pulling that average down, they're getting less than average physical activity, we have a situation like this, where they are ending up with an even lower bone mineral density by age 25 by virtue of the fact that they're not doing the thing that causes increases in bone mineral density, which is external loading. So we've got our resistance trainee, we've got our very active, we have our average active, and then we have our underactive, right? Well, over the course of your lifetime, on average, you lose bone mineral density. Over the course of your lifetime, you lose bone mineral density. And so if we're talking about the average person, they're going to gain bone mineral density up to about age 25 or 30. Then over the course of their lifetime, they're going to lose bone mineral density. Okay, over the course of their lifetime, they're going to lose bone mineral density. And let's say that the cutoff for osteoporosis is something like here. Okay, so this person over their average lifetime, they're getting fairly close to that cutoff for osteoporosis. In inactive average Americans, the risk of osteoporosis is fairly high, especially if we're talking about females. If we're talking about this underactive person, so somebody who is less active than the rest of the population, well, so not only is their peak bone mineral density in their 20s lower, but they're also going to lose bone mineral density faster. Because one of the things that we know helps you maintain bone mineral density is physical activity. And so this person who loses it faster, they are going to be at higher risk for osteoporosis, and if they get it, they're going to tend to get it earlier. If we have this person who, over the course of their childhood, is really active, if they stay really active over the course of their life, they're going to lose bone mineral density less fast. Which means that the chances of getting osteoporosis, of getting anywhere near that threshold, are much, much lower. Even if this very, very active child has an average physical activity over the course of their life and they lose at the same rate. Oh, actually, these let's see, let me fix this line real quick. This is supposed to be like that. They're supposed to be parallel. So even if this kid, the very, very active kid, loses bone mineral density at the same rate as your average American, because they now become relatively sedentary even after having a very, very active childhood, by virtue of the fact that they had a higher peak bone mineral density, by the time they are an older adult, they might lose their bone mineral density at the same rate over the course of their lifetime, but they started out with a much higher bone mineral density, which means risk of osteoporosis is much, much less. So one of the best things that we can do for kids, especially girls, to help them reduce the risk of osteoporosis is not take a calcium supplement, is not to address menopause better. It's not to do anything that happens during old age. It's not to avoid taking birth control or any of the other things that people have come up with. Have them be really, really active in childhood, and we're setting them up for success when they're 80. Okay? So what they do over the course of their childhood is going to affect their bone health when they're 70, when they're 80, when they're 90. And because of this fact, if we can get them to a higher bone mineral density peak in their 20s, so even if they lose bone mineral density at the same rate, then they're better off. Now, imagine that we were to take this very active kid, so if this is what they would have done on average, and this dotted line was they kept up a high amount of physical activity, well, their decay in bone mineral density is going to be a lot slower. And because the decay in bone mineral density is a lot slower, well, by the time they reach anywhere close to high risk for osteoporosis, that might put them out to 105 years old, 110 years old, 120 years old, when they're probably dead anyways. So it doesn't really matter. But in the meantime, we gave them protection against the breaks associated with osteoporosis. Now, if we take this kid who was very active and did resistance training, and then they continue staying very active and doing resistance training over the course of their life, they decay less fast than all of the rest of these groups, and their chances of osteopenia, osteoporosis, is significantly reduced. It's significantly reduced because they have continued to externally load their bones to a large degree over the course of their lifetime, which means that their bone health is going to be a heck of a lot better than it would be otherwise. So in an ideal world, we have kids who are very active and do resistance training throughout their childhood and into their 20s, giving them as high of a bone mineral density peak as possible. Then if they continue to lift and continue to stay really active over the course of their lifetime, the decay they experience in bone mineral density across their entire body ends up being significantly less, which means the risk of osteoporosis drops incredibly. But for some reason, people are still afraid of resistance training. I mean, how many things can you really say to like a 7 or 8 year old? Do this, and it's gonna help you when you're 80. Okay, there are very, very few things. Resistance training is one of those things. Okay. So the moral of the story here is that resistance training for bone density is really, 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 really a good idea for children. We know that resistance training in kids can improve body composition, so we can help kids gain muscle. Now, they can't gain very much muscle. They don't have the testosterone for that. They don't have the growth hormone for that. They don't have the insulin-like growth factor for that. They simply do not have the ability to put on lots of muscle. But we can help them gain some. We can help them lose fat mass, particularly if we're talking about obese children, is that resistance training is incredibly effective at inducing positive changes in body composition. We also know that resistance training is really effective at increasing power expression. We know that it's effective at increasing sports performance overall. It's going to make kids run faster, jump higher, run longer. And we know that we can do this with bodyweight exercises. We can do this with medicine balls. We can do it with free weights. We can do it with plyometrics. Okay, there's a lot of different modalities in addition to barbells and dumbbells that will allow kids to improve how well they do in sports. But unfortunately, one of the decisions that a lot of people make is they go, well, I want to become a better soccer player, so I need to play soccer all the time. Well, we could do really, really good by cutting out an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours of soccer per week and replace that with a little bit of resistance training. And by doing so, we cause huge health benefits. We cause huge performance benefits. And we give that kid a little bit of a break from the sport they're probably doing too much of already, thanks to the overbearing parent. Okay, we know that muscular endurance can increase as a result of doing resistance training. But there's a lot of other things on the health side. We can improve cardiovascular risk factors. So we can improve levels of HDL. So we can make HDL go up. So the good cholesterol that picks up the fatty deposits in your vessels. We can cause LDL and VLDL to go down. So that's the bad cholesterol that causes the fatty deposits. We can cause decreases in blood pressure. Well, unfortunately, we now see kids with elevated cholesterol. We now see kids with elevated blood pressure. Okay? And it's happening often enough that it's not all that remarkable. It happens, unfortunately, I wouldn't say frequently, but it happens often enough that nobody's that surprised. Like medical providers are not that surprised anymore. They're still shocked and appalled, but they're not, it's not the first time they've ever seen that case in their entire career of practice. And so we know that resistance training can have positive effects on that. There are kids that are getting prescribed statins for their cholesterol. There are kids that are getting put on blood pressure medication because their blood pressure is too high. And not because of congenital issues, but purely because they get no exercise and they eat shit. Okay, if you've got a kid that only ever eats, taquitos and hamburgers and curly fries, and then sits for 12 hours a day playing Call of Duty, is it any surprise that their physical activity is virtually null, that their blood work is garbage, and they're obese? No. But that's what we're seeing in much higher rates in our society, and honestly across the world too. And so resistance training is an effective intervention here. So even if you can't take that kid and fix the rest of what they're doing, at the very least, we can try to alleviate some of the problems through an intervention that takes 2 to 3 hours a week. We know that we can, I don't think I pulled it up in this slide, but I found a couple of studies that have supported improvements in blood glucose tolerance as well. So once upon a time, and this predates the vast majority of you, but type 2 diabetes used to be called adult onset diabetes. Okay, so type 1 is the type that you're born with. Type 2 is the one that you develop, that you basically do to yourself in 99% of cases. But it used to be called adult onset diabetes because it only really showed up in adults. But the problem is obesity rates are so high amongst kids, and physical activity rates are so low amongst kids, and diets and sugar consumption are so high are so high and so bad amongst kids that we can't call it adult onset diabetes anymore. because it happens in kids. Okay, with the exception of like having a dysfunctional pancreas or having pancreatic cancer, or you have to get your pancreas removed for some reason. You should not get type 2 diabetes. You shouldn't. But there are kids who are so inactive and eat so poorly that they are developing insulin resistance, that their pancreases are working overtime to pump out extra insulin because their muscle cells and their liver are so insulin resistant. Resistance training is an effective means at addressing that. Okay, obviously that's never going to make up for all the lifestyle stuff that is contributing to that, but it can help. Okay, it can at least help and get that kid started in a positive direction. Another thing to consider is that there's a lot of psychosocial aspects to physical activity as well. Okay, we know from a huge body of studies that any kind of exercise is good for people's self-esteem. It's good for people's self-efficacy. So self-efficacy is kind of like context-dependent self-esteem. It's your confidence in yourself in a particular type of activity. It's your confidence in your ability to do a particular type of activity. And so we know that exercise improves both of those things. We know that exercise improves confidence. We know that it improves self-image. It's a wonderful thing. It also improves this in kids. And so I'm imagining a little stereotype right now. Is we've got an overweight little kid who, thanks to a huge number of movies over decades and decades, make the fat kid a target for laughter, right? Because fat kid falls down, funny, right? Okay. Well, that little kid is used to having that kind of stereotype against him, and they're nervous about doing physical activity because they're going to huff and puff, and their face is going to turn red, and they're going to be slower than everybody else, and they don't want to go swimming because they're afraid of taking their shirt off. So you've got a whole bunch of self-image things and self-confidence things and self-efficacy things that are interfering with that kid's ability to and desire to do any kind of physical activity. So you end up on this kind of negative spiral. Is can't do it, feels bad about it, so avoids it, which makes the can't do it and feels bad about it worse, which makes them avoid it. Okay, so you end up with this kind of spiral on the downside. On the other hand, if we can intervene with exercise, we can start moving in the other direction. So through providing exercise, we can improve their thoughts about their body, improve their confidence, improve their self-efficacy, which makes them more likely to do the exercise, which then is going to help further improve their self-confidence, their self-efficacy, and their body image, which is going to keep them exercising. Are we seeing? So it's the same kind of cycle, just in the other direction. So now we're turning the screw upward rather than downward. And so I think that resistance training in particular is great because it's not going to be as limiting for, excuse the phrase, but for the fat kid. Okay, you take a skinny kid and you take a fat kid and you both have them run, it's very clear who's out of shape and who's not. And it's especially going to show itself because that kid is having to carry around a whole bunch more weight than the skinny kid is. And so it's going to exacerbate the difference between them, is that the kid who is carrying around a lot of body fat and a lot of body mass, they aren't going to run as well, not just because they're not in as good a shape, but because they've got more body mass. Whereas resistance training, because you're working against external resistance, the differences are not going to be as stark. Okay, and so you're not going to see as much of a difference between the fit kids and the not fit kids. Okay, which makes the not fit kids fit in a little bit better. The other thing is that if you want to get better at dealing with high amounts of body mass, get stronger. So if you take those overweight kids and you make them a whole lot stronger, they're more capable of handling their body weight, which means that all those physical activities that they felt were closed to them are now much less closed because they have a better ability to handle their body weight, which means they're going to do them more often, which means their body weight's probably going to start coming down, or there's more likelihood it's going to come down. Are we following here? So resistance training is a spectacular thing. Any exercise is a spectacular thing. But I think resistance training in particular is a great thing because of the special way in which it's going to help people. Okay? But again, this is not a replacement for getting everything else right. Okay? Or doing a pretty good job with everything else. It's not a replacement for that, but it's going to help. Okay? And it's going to help in a way that I think is special and is different than a lot of other types of exercise. The last thing that we know from resistance training research is that it's a effective means for reducing risk of injury. We absolutely know this to be true in adults. It also seems to be true in kids. Okay, so the research that's out there, unfortunately there's not as much as we'd like, but the research that's out there seems to be very clear. It's all very consistent, saying that if you get kids stronger and you have them do resistance training, their risk of injury is going to go down. Because remember, at the end of the day, the reason that a tissue becomes damaged is because it was subjected to stress that was greater than it was able to handle. And so if you want to make someone harder to injure, repeatedly subject them to stress that's lower than what is going to damage their tissues, which makes those tissues stronger and stronger and stronger, which makes those tissues harder to damage. Okay, that's most of what this comes down to, is making those tissues stronger, making them harder to hurt. And so this seems to also be true in kids. Now, given all these, yep, go for it.
I was going to ask, what are like common injuries for kids at a young age playing sports?
I mean, they're all, most of the time they're going to be acute injuries. You know, they got run into, they got slide tackled and twisted their knee, they rolled their ankle. You know, they can pull muscles just as well as adults can. But one of the things that we're starting to see a lot of is overuse injuries. Overuse injuries are climbing very, very quickly amongst child athletes. And I don't remember if I mentioned this class or I mentioned the other class, but in my opinion, overuse injuries should not happen, full stop, in kids. They should not be doing any sport often enough that they end up with an overuse injury. Okay, they should not be. Kids should not be doing sports often enough that they end up with injuries like UCL tears, or end up with injuries like hip impingement, or where you're starting to see osteoarthritic changes in a child. That should not happen. Okay, I mean, sometimes it's going to happen. You know, sometimes there's going to be kids that are ridiculously self-motivated, and they are the cause of that overuse injury. But that should be the exception. Okay, that should be extremely rare. And in my opinion, it probably shouldn't happen, because ideally a parent is going to be able to look at that and go, hey, you know what? Yes, I know that you want to build everything about in your life around softball, but hey, let's take a little break and let's go do some other things, so that when you come back around to softball, you want to do it that much more. Right? You know, in my opinion, you know, you as the parent, you're not there to just be a friend. You're there to help your kid make better decisions. They don't have a fully formed brain yet, right? They don't know how to make good decisions for themselves for the most part, and so. Yeah, in my opinion, overuse injuries should not happen anywhere near as often as they do. I don't think they should happen at all in kids. But the problem is we're seeing overuse injuries happen a lot. We're seeing it happen a lot. And that comes from just doing the same thing over and over and over for too long. We need to give kids breaks from the different activities that they're doing. And an easy way to sneak in a break, you know, if you've got let's say that you are there as a trainer, and you know you've got a parent that is, you know, clearly one of these type A parents. You know, they want their kid to be the best soccer player she can possibly be, and she's going to get a scholarship, and she's going to go play in Europe, and all this kind of stuff, right? So she's playing in middle school. You know, she's playing in a like a developmental league, and she's playing in an elite travel league, and she's got a coach. Okay, so she's doing this all of the time. Well, if you there as a strength and conditioning coach, you're looking at that situation, you should be thinking back to this lecture and going, you know what, that's problematic. Okay, this is very problematic. But you should also be looking at the situation and going, in the short term, I can't fix this situation. Because if I go in and I go guns blazing and I tell this parent, hey, everything that you're doing is wrong, all these decisions you make are bad, you're going to hurt your kid, and if you go off like that, then that parent's going to be gone, and you're never going to have a chance to change their mind. On the other hand, a really easy way to start at least giving them some break from sport is see if you can convince the parent, hey, you know what? Instead of doing one extra practice or two extra practices a week, why don't we have them lift twice? Why don't we have them lift for 3 times a week? Because then you get kind of a double benefit, is that instead of doing 30 hours of softball practice a week, or what did I say, soccer? Yes, instead of 30 hours of soccer practice a week, instead it's 27 hours a week, and they're getting 3 hours of resistance training, which we know is going to be beneficial. So we've managed to reduce a little bit of what they're getting way too much of and added in something that's beneficial. And then you can now kind of think about this long term, where you can start to try to change the parent's mind. But if you go guns blazing right out of the gate and you start telling people what they think is wrong and the decisions that they're making for their child are incorrect, they're immediately going to throw up their walls, they're immediately going to throw up their guard, and you're never going to be able to change their mind about anything. But you can do a little tiny bit of damage control in the short run by getting them to start resistance training. And then you have opportunity as you build trust with them, you build clout with them, they begin to respect you more and more for making good decisions with their kid, that you can then start to help them make better decisions on the training side of things. Okay? Does that give you? In my experience, trying to change people's minds is difficult. It's really hard to change people's minds. I have the responsibility of trying to do that with a couple hundred students every single semester. And it's not something I can do on the first day. It's something that I really only truly start to do towards the middle to the end of the semester. And the people whose minds I change the most are the ones who I've had multiple classes with and I've known for multiple years. Okay, that's the kind of length of time that you really want to be considering for how long it takes to truly change somebody's mind about something. Is it takes months to years. And so when we're trying to get a parent to make better decisions with their kids, you can't change their mind overnight. You're not going to be able to. On the other hand, if you have months of building trust and showing that you know your stuff, then you can start to change their mind to a larger degree. Or years worth of doing the same thing, then you can start to change their mind to a larger degree. But it's going to take a long time. Okay, it's really going to take a long time to make that happen. Well, one of the things that you might see some opposition for when it comes to resistance training, so if you are in that position where you go, hey, you know what, why don't we do some resistance training with your kid? You can talk about all these different benefits, but they're going to have those things in the back of their mind that they have heard, or inevitably every parent or every adult has some story about somebody that had some kind of catastrophic injury when it came to resistance training. In my experience, when those catastrophic injuries have happened in adults, it's because somebody did something stupid. Okay? Somebody was doing something real dumb, and they dropped the bar in their face because they had way too much weight on the bar, and they grabbed their skinny 115-pound training partner to try to pull 300 pounds off their face. Right? That was just a dumb decision. Injuries, when they do happen amongst adults, are very rare. In my experience, they're usually because somebody did something dumb. And the risks for resistance training in kids are really not there. Okay? The risks that most people believe are there for kids are really not there. What are some of the risks that all of you have heard about related to kids in resistance training? Have you heard some of these before? Okay, that it'll stunt growth. What else have we heard?
That's a good first one.
Okay.
Hurts their joints.
Okay, so it might damage their joints.
Might damage their joints at a young age.
Okay, yeah, it might damage their so yep. So yeah, damage their joints. It stunts growth. What else have we heard?
Weights are going to squish them.
Yeah, it might hurt them. Okay, just I mean, God forbid they touch a barbell one time. I mean, that's going to cause their knees to blow out, and they're going to get hurt for the rest of their life. What else? Okay, it could cause damage to their growth plates. The old long-standing myth that resistance training is for bodybuilders only, that still exists. That somehow, God forbid, a little girl touches a barbell once in her life, she's going to grow 50 pounds of muscle and turn into a man. I mean, there's all kinds of just dumb old ideas about this that are completely untrue. Resistance training does not make like for example, little girls, they don't have enough testosterone. They simply don't have enough testosterone to gain lots and lots of muscle. And for that matter, neither do little boys. You don't typically see little boys with giant muscles. What was his name? Little Hercules was some kid that was floating around the internet years ago. And that kid was probably taking some kind of testosterone. His dad was probably sneaking testosterone in him in some way. Because little kids don't normally end up in that type of situation. That is not normal for a kid to have a high amount of muscle mass. They can be very strong, absolutely, but carry around a lot of muscle mass? No. So the risks that a lot of people talk about simply don't exist. Okay? They really don't exist. I mean, yes, this is physical activity, involves loading. Injuries can happen. Okay? These do happen sometimes. But normally, when injuries happen, they happen because of bad technique, poor coaching, inappropriately assigned exercises, trying to use equipment that they shouldn't be using. I cautioned you against using machines because They're built for the average person, and then they have to make adjustments based on whether you're above average or you're below average in terms of size. But kids, a kid that might be yay tall, no freaking way are they going to be able to fit into 99% of the machines that exist in most gyms. Sometimes there will be facilities that have machines built towards kids, but they're extremely rare. Okay, that is an extremely uncommon situation. You know what adjusts really, really well to a child? They're using their body as resistance, using medicine balls as resistance, using barbells as resistance, using dumbbells as resistance. Because on a power rack, if they're this tall, you can make the J-hooks this high off the ground. If they're doing something like a deadlift, well, the ground is in the same place whether you're this tall or you're this tall. Okay, that's the nice thing about barbells and dumbbells is they adjust to your size because you don't have to worry about moving in the same pattern that a machine requires you to move. You can do all of that in free space. And so while machines are often seen as the safest option and the most ideal option, especially with kids, they're not. Because of the fact you're very, very rarely going to find machines that are anywhere close to being adjustable for the size that a kid is going to be. And so, again, we're back to free weights. And we're back to free weights. Even though the stereotype is machines are safer, we should always use machines. In many ways, that's true, but not for kids. And the reality of how expensive that most exercise machines are, 5, 10, 15, 20 grand per machine, it's extremely unlikely that you're going to find a facility that has enough machines for adults and for kids. You're not going to typically see that. Okay, you're not going to typically see that. Within the research, there are some studies that have shown up showing injuries in kids, but they're all case studies. Okay? A case study is a particular type of study where a single person was the subject of that study. And it's typically done by healthcare providers, so a doctor or a DO or a nurse practitioner or a PA or something like that. And then they write in, they say, okay, we had a patient who was in this situation, who ended up with this injury. Here's what we did to address it, yada, yada, yada. And so yes, there are injuries in kids due to resistance training that have shown up in the literature. But they're case studies. Single people, single kids that have gotten injured. Case studies do not an epidemic make. Okay? If resistance training was horribly damaging to kids, we would have bodies all over the place, right? There'd be dead kids in every gym in the country. There'd be damaged kids, stumbling out of every gym in the country. But do we? No, we don't. Those bodies don't exist. Those damaged kids don't exist. Okay? So if it's as risky as people seem to think it is, we would see huge numbers of children that are damaged. We would see huge number of kids that have had all of these supposed problems that are associated with resistance training, and we don't. Okay? There are one-offs. There are some kids who do get injured in the weight room. It happens, but it's usually associated with this. Okay? So the risks of participation in resistance training are at least as low as participation in most sports. Okay? At least as low as participation in the vast majority of sports. It's usually lower. Because if you're following the advice that I'm going to give you, then they're not being loaded that high. They're not pushing them that hard. So the risk is going to be even lower than it normally would be in an adult. Okay? The last thing to think about here is that in terms of just had a brain fart and I lost what point I was going to make. I was trying to stall a little bit and give a pretty big preamble, and then I totally lost it. Here's the point I was going to make. Is that if we look at the forces, the kinetics, the biomechanics of resistance exercises, and we look at the biomechanics of most sports, the amount of loading that children's bodies experience when they, let's say they're hanging on the monkey bars and they drop onto the ground. The amount of loading that is going to go through their ankles and their shins and their knees and their thighs and their hips vastly exceeds what they're going to experience if they do a squat or a deadlift or a lunge or a step up. Okay, on like 2-3 times at least higher loading than they're going to experience through virtually any resistance training exercise. kid who is gonna turn and cut, okay, plant, then drive back off, the loading they experience in that is going to be substantially higher than anything they'd ever experience in a lunge or a squat. But what do we fear? The lunge and the squat. We don't fear a kid going out and playing. Okay? We don't fear a kid going out and playing soccer. We don't fear a kid jumping for a rebound and then coming back down hard. We don't fear that. But the loading in those types of activities far exceeds what they're going to get in resistance training. Right? Especially if you're following the advice I'm about to give you. Okay? And so, for a lot of different reasons, there's no reason to be afraid of resistance training in kids. There's really no reason to be. So when it comes to exercise that we prescribe for children, we have a few things that we want to pay attention to. Well, the first thing we want to pay attention to is fitness level. Don't prescribe exercises if the kid is not fit enough to handle that exercise. Simply put. If they're not strong enough to do a certain exercise, if they're not coordinated enough to do a certain exercise, if they're not fast enough, or whatever the fitness quality that represents a limiting factor for them, if they are not fit enough to do that, then don't assign it to them. But is that rocket science? No. Okay? That's a pretty obvious point that unfortunately not everybody pays attention to. And unfortunately not everybody recognizes the fact that that's the exact same thing you do in adults. Is that if an exercise is not appropriate for an adult because their fitness level is not good enough for them to do it, then you don't do it. It's the same thing in a kid. Okay, the other thing is that we also want to consider variations in body size. Okay, this is one area that might be a little bit different in adults, but you're typically going to see much smaller bodies. Okay, you're typically going to see much, much smaller bodies, which means 99.999% of machines are out. So we're back to free weights. We're back to body weight resistance. We're back to elastic bands. We're back to exercises that don't require you to move with a machine. In my opinion, you don't really have to treat kids differently than adults because you would adjust an exercise to a tall adult in the same way that you would adjust an exercise to a short adult, which is the same that you would adjust an exercise to a short kid. Okay? And so the knee moves in a kid the same way it moves in an adult. The hip moves in a kid the same way it moves in an adult. And so if you want a kid to squat well, okay, we'll adjust the equipment, adjust the safety bars and all of that stuff so that it is appropriate for that kid, so that it fits their body. Okay? It's not as special as you think it is. It's not as different from working with adults as you think it might be. The last thing that you want to consider here is maturity. This is another one that's a little bit different than adults. Generally speaking, is that we want to consider biological maturity. We want to consider how developed is their body. How much can they handle the loading that I'm doing with them? Okay, if you've got a 5-year-old, all right, doing heavy loading with barbells and having them do 3 RMs and 5 RMs and that kind of stuff, very much not a good idea. If you've got a 16-year-old that's got pretty good technique, sure, that might be a much better idea. In part due to the technique mastery and being able to trust them to use good technique through a set, but also their body is a lot more mature. Their body's a lot more developed. So not only have they grown for longer, but also hopefully that 16-year-old, they have been training for longer too, which means their body is better suited for handling the demands of training. So we want to adjust based on biological maturity. The other thing that we want to consider is psychological maturity too. This is another one that's going to come up with kids, is that kids are not motivated by the same things adults are. Their attention spans aren't as large as adults are. They're not going to be into the same thing that adults are. And so the way that you talk to a kid is necessarily different than the way that you talk to an adult. That doesn't mean you talk down to kids. Hey, buddy, what's going on? All right, if you do that to a 13-year-old, they're never going to speak to you again. Okay, you're going to immediately lose credibility with them. So we treat them like individuals. If you got a 13-year-old that really thrives off that stuff, great. If you got a 13-year-old that wants to be talked to like an adult, it happens to watch. What did I see on TV? It was an advertisement for Floribama Shore. Jersey Shore was super duper big when when was Jersey Shore big? I guess it was when I was in college or after college. I don't know, somewhere in there. But yeah, there's a Floribama. So imagine you got some kid that somehow got hooked on that, right? And they want to be talk to you like a bro. Okay, that's fine. Okay, that's the thing that they happen to respond to. So you kind of have to meet them where they are. But it's the same thing with any adults, right? Is that if they have a way that they like to speak and they have a way that they like to be treated, okay, meet them where they're at. But with kids, we want to make kind of a judgment call based on their personality, based on their maturity. If you've got a kid that you can't trust to listen to you, don't give them risky exercises. Don't give them exercises that require a high attention span. Don't give them exercises that they want to do their way, and if they do it their way, they're going to get hurt. Okay, so you've got that kid that doesn't listen as well, or the kid who doesn't follow directions as well. Well, maybe adjust the difficulty of the exercise. Okay, if you've got a 7 or an 8-year-old, teaching them to, okay, I want you to curl your wrists in, and then I want you as aggressively as possible, I want you to drive your hips up and shrug your shoulders. Okay, an 8-year-old isn't going to understand that. Okay, not in the same way that an adult might understand that. And so you got to approach them where they're at and give them exercises that are appropriate for their maturity level. Now, that being said, this is not something that you want to make a snap judgment call based on how old they are. It's not something you want to make a snap judgment based on their age. One of the most mature, one of the most coachable athletes I've ever had the chance to work with was 11. Okay, she was a really talented gymnast. She had clearly been raised well. She'd clearly been coached well. She was incredibly well spoken. She was a great listener and just super duper easy to coach. Like this is the type of kid, like you'd say, hey, here's what I want you to do, and then she'd ask questions about it. And she'd go, hey, so I think that this is what you're talking about. Is this the position that you want me to get into, or is this where you want me to put my hands? Or is this how you want my feet to be? It was awesome. She was so easy to work with. On the other hand, I've had college athletes that are, total shitheads. Okay? And were much more difficult to coach than the 11-year-old was. And so I have to treat people where they're at. Is that if I have somebody who is hard-headed and they don't want to listen to me and how they're supposed to do the technique of the exercise, and doing it their way is going to increase the risk of them getting injured, well, they don't get to do that exercise. They've got to do the more rudimentary exercise because I can't trust them not to injure themselves. Okay? Their feelings are less important than staying healthy. Okay? Their desire to do the things that the rest of the team is less important than them not getting injured. And so you got to make judgment calls there. And sometimes they're not fun judgment calls. Sometimes you're going to have an athlete that's pissed off at you because they want to do what other people are doing. But if they're not mature enough to handle it, they're not mature enough to do that without hurting themselves or having a higher risk of hurting themselves, then they shouldn't do it. Okay? And this is one of those things that can be a little bit more difficult in kids because they won't understand that as much as an adult might. Okay? An adult you can kind of address from a more rational level, and you can give good explanations. And not saying that all of us are purely rational. We're not. But an adult is typically going to be a little bit more receptive to that stuff than a kid might, because they're going to see all their friends doing other stuff and they go, why can't I do that? Well, you can't really tell the kid because I don't trust you. Okay, that's not a great way to build rapport with them. But you may have more hiccups in dealing with it. Now, some other things that we want to consider are that we don't want to progress to more difficult exercises or progress to more weight because they've moved into a new stage, or because their training buddy has also gone up in weight. We don't want to progress because of external factors. We need to progress because they are ready to do the next thing. So if you're doing a push-up progression, okay, if they have mastered knee push-ups, and then you have them do full push-ups and they're just garbage at them, they're not yet ready to go to full push-ups yet. So you got to find an intermediary step. Okay, just because they have turned from 9 to 10 doesn't mean that they move into the next LTAD stage, which means that their training would change. No, that just means that they got a day older. That doesn't mean that they're any more developed. That doesn't mean they're any more prepared to handle the training that they need. So we need to progress people on a case-by-case basis based upon their needs and their level of development. One of the things that helps shoehorn into this and I think helps underscore that this is a beneficial thing, it's not just about risk reduction, is that there's some research that indicates that kids will do better long-term and enjoy it more if you focus on exercise mastery. Instead of focusing on harder exercises, instead of focusing on lifting more weight or doing more reps, if you focus on exercise mastery, the research seems to indicate that kids have more fun long-term doing that. The side benefit is that by focusing on doing the exercise as good as possible, they will instead have a lower risk of injury and have more fun with it. USA Weightlifting, it's not super duper extensive, but USA Weightlifting has started doing, or I guess not started, it's now 7 or 8 years that they've been doing this for. At some meets, they will have kids competitions, and I think it's like age 10 and down, or maybe it's age 11 and down, or something like that, where they don't compete for how much weight they can lift. They compete for who's got the best technique. And so there are rating scales that the judges will use in order to score those kids' technique. And so the kid with the best technique, that's the kid that ends up standing with the gold medal. Okay, the kid with the worst technique is the one that doesn't get to stand on the stage. And so that's a great way of celebrating and encouraging kids to focus not on the weight that they're lifting, but on the technique that they're using. Because that's the time when we want to be having them master their technique anyways. Now, to be fair, I mean, we typically don't end up in situations where we've got 10 kids and only 3 get to stand up on the platform, and they go, all right, well, 4 through 10, you guys are losers. Okay? Usually it's like 1 or 2 kids that compete, so somebody takes first, somebody takes second. Nobody's feelings are really that hurt. But again, I think it sends a really, really good message to the kids, is that it's about the exercise mastery, not the weight yet. It will be at some point, but not right now. All right, so general guidelines for what kids should be working on. They should be training 2 to 3 times per week. In general, just kind of a blanket recommendation of 3 to 4 sets for 5 to 12 reps for strength development. Now, you'll notice how for most kids, we've only got one recommendation up there, 3 to 4 sets of 5 to 12 reps. The reason for this is that this is really the only thing that you should be worrying about in kids. Just worry about getting them strong. Okay, just worry about their strength development. The power will come as a result of focusing on strength. The muscular endurance will come as a result of focusing on strength. Okay, so we want to try to encourage kids to get stronger rather than worrying about other qualities when they're doing resistance training. Okay, because the other stuff will happen as a result of getting stronger, as a result of mastering new and more difficult exercises. Okay, that's going to be the more important thing that they can glean from doing resistance training. Once you've got older youth, so 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15 years old, that's when power development is probably more important. Or more important than it was previously. Not more important than strength, but more important than it was previously. You still want to be working on strength as much as possible, but power has increased in importance, and it's more useful of a training goal than just strength. Another thing to consider is that, so as you progress, is that even though you're working on strength, you got to make sure that technique doesn't suffer. Okay? You got to make sure the technique doesn't suffer. And so if you're giving, say, 3 sets of 5 reps, the weight should be heavy, so it's challenging, but it should not be so heavy that it causes their form to break down. If their form breaks down, then you got to back off on the weight. So if you tell a kid, hey, you know what, I want you doing 10, we're going to be doing 10 reps today, and they're good for the first rep, good for the second one, good for the 5th one, good for the 7th one, good for the 8th one, but 9 and 10, they are ugly as sin. They're not ready to go to heavier weight yet, because they need to be able to make it all the way through the work that you want them to do with great technique. That's the point that they're ready to handle additional loading, not before then. One of the things that also has shown up in research is using a 1 repetition at a time approach. So rather than saying, all right, little Johnny, I want you to do 10 reps, just say, all right, so you're going to do 10 reps, but I'm going to count with you, okay? Okay, so do your first one. Hey, that was really awesome. Okay, let's do another one. All right, that's great. That was number 2. Okay, let's do another one. Oh, that was awesome. That was great. That's number 3. So they're focusing on each rep individually rather than 1, 2, 3, right? It's going to make it a lot easier for them to focus on doing technique really, really well. Again, the likelihood that they're going to keep their full attention on it for 10 reps in a row is not as good. If you're there with them every rep, it's going to be a lot easier to get good technique out of them. It's going to be a lot easier to get good focus out of them. Okay, the last thing that we want to make sure that we do on an individual basis is avoid repetition maximums. You do not want them anywhere close to failure. They should not be failing on exercises, full stop. What happens to the quality of your technique the closer you get to failure? Okay, it's going to go down. It's going to get worse. So if you have a kid that's learning exercises for the first time and you're taking them near failure, you are creating bad habits. You're teaching them bad technique in doing so. So not only is the risk of injury higher, but you're teaching them bad habits. Remember, I told you that one of the most important things that we can do in kids during their childhood is teach them a broad range of motor skills. Well, an important caveat to that is that you're teaching them to do a broad range of motor skills correctly. Not, all right, we learned how to squat. Okay, we learned how to lunge. Okay, they got to learn how to do it right. Okay, I mean, that shouldn't have to be said, but you'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. Okay. In terms of groups, this is probably a good idea. Okay, working one-on-one with kids will work. It'll be fine. But if you can get them into groups, train 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8 at a time, this is going to be spectacular. And the reason it's going to be spectacular is that, based on the research, this tends to increase persistence. Okay, which means kids trying hard and then coming back to try hard again, and then coming back, and then coming back. Okay, they're going to participate more often and longer. They're going to stick with it for longer. They also are going to tend to work harder. This is one of the other things that's great about putting kids in groups, is that they tend to get a little competitive. Okay, they tend to compete against their friends, which is a spectacular thing. Competition is not bad in and of itself. Competition is not bad in and of itself. Obviously, we can make competition bad. Okay, if you don't beat your friend Johnny in a race, I'm never going to love you, right? That's obviously not good competition, right? Or, oh, I can't believe you lost to him. I'm so disappointed in you. You're worthless, right? That's obviously bad competition. But hey, I can't believe how hard you tried. You know what? You lost that race, but I could see you were trying hardest. Maybe the next time you get it. That's good competition. Or having two kids that are both trying to show who's got the best technique, and you go, oh my gosh, you know what? You were both so close. Your technique was so good, I couldn't tell the difference. That's wonderful competition, because they're still trying to be the best, but neither one suffered as a result of not being the best. Does that make sense? Okay, so we can use competition to our advantage and use it as an opportunity to teach them healthy competition, teach them how to win well, and teach them how to lose well. Because they're going to lose in low stakes environments. They're going to win in low stakes environments. So if they turn in a total turd, okay, they go, I did more reps than you did, that kind of thing. That's a great opportunity to give them a lesson. Okay, teach them not to be a shithead. Okay, if you've got somebody else that's really dragging their heels and they're really upset by the fact that they lost, that's a great time to go and talk to them. Hey, you know what? I know that you lost, but you tried really, really hard, so I'm still proud of you. Okay, so that's a great time for a lesson, because it's not just about the physical development. It's about the mental skills that they need to succeed in sport, but it's also about the mental skills that they need to be able to succeed in everything else. Okay, the same people who are very poor winners in sport also tend to be poor winners in the rest of their life. Okay, those people who are really poor losers in sport also tend to be poor losers in the rest of their life. Okay, the football player who gets pissed off after they got beat in a match and then decides he wants to drop a deuce in the middle of the locker room. Okay, that's the same kid that is going to do that on his boss's desk when he gets fired. Okay, if you're a shithead as an athlete, you're going to be a shithead in the rest of your life too. Hopefully, you had coaches that would intervene before you ever get to that point. Okay, because when we see college athletes acting like turds, when we see pro athletes acting like idiots, okay, yes, that is clearly their fault. If you're an adult and you act like an idiot, that is your fault. But hopefully, there were coaches along the way that helped to steer you in a better direction. Okay, and not to get on a soapbox or anything here, but when you have athletes that have literally everything handed to them all the way through middle school, all the way through high school, all the way through college, and you hear about some football player like Texas A&M or Florida State or something, and it turns out they've been arrested 14 times, but they get let go every time because the sheriff is buddies with the football coach. And then it turns out that they beat up and kill their wife when they're in the NFL. Is it really that big of a surprise? Because they never saw any consequences leading up to that point. They never had anybody say, hey, you know what? This is wrong. You can't do this. So hopefully we can grab them when they're 8, before they turn into total shitheels at 25, and we can start to send them on a better direction. Because the fact of the matter is that life is not just about sport. Take this from somebody who has basically made my entire career around studying sport and studying performance. Life is not just about that. And so we got to be thinking big picture too. We have enough, poorly adjusted, geniuses around. We have enough poorly adjusted athletes around that are great at one thing, and then, like Ryan Lochte. And we remember what happened to him at the last in Brazil, where he got robbed at a gas station. When it turned out he was just shit-faced and he started trying to start fights and was vandalizing like crazy. And instead of him having to see any sort of flack for it, he just hopped on a plane and flew home, and he never saw any consequences for acting like a total shitheel. I mean, we have enough people like that in this world. We don't need any more of them.